Hey, folks, welcome to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. Carlos, we brought Dave Burkett in again today because he's the man, and we wanted to talk about the Red Wings. And
you two are our Red Wings experts. Between both of you, you've probably paid to attend a Red Wings game. What, like half a time? One time? 1.5 times?
We both have televisions, and we both watch. And I think we both know that, that, like in most sports, you don't win a Stanley Cup without a superstar. I think there's one team in the last decade that maybe has, and Dave, I'm sure, can tell us what that team is. Right, Dave? No, I don't want to put you on the spot.
The Pistons in 2005.
Exactly, the St. Louis Blues or the Detroit Pistons of the NHL. There you go. So, no, Dave, it took me weeks and weeks of research just to find out where Little Caesars Arena was. So, and then I got in trouble with our colleague Elena St. James last night because I ran into Ken Holland on the elevator ride up, and I used to know him pretty well from back when I really seriously covered the Wings. And she's like, "How do you know Ken Holland?" Like that, and I said, "I used to sit in his office all the time." She said, "That story's getting old." I know. She was. Yeah.
She's tired to be trading on your glory years of the past when you were the undercover fan.
Well, I will say this real quickly because I know how much Carlos loves Connor McDavid of the Edmonton Oilers, Dave.
I know
Ken Holland. Ken Holland. Yeah.
I know. I'm well aware of Connor McDavid. My son plays NHL on PS5, so I'm in tune with some of the top players.
So Holland told me last night, you'll appreciate this. He said, he's like, "This is the best player I've ever seen in my career." And I said, "Does he remind you of anybody with the speed? What about Fedorov?" And he's like, "Well, Fedorov was close in terms of the speed, but he combines Fedorov's quickness and speed with Yzerman's sort of toughness and the way he gets in there and chips."
Exactly how I describe him too.
Yeah, going into the boards. And well, that's a pretty good player if you want to combine those two. In any case, that's
a great player. It's obviously why the Oilers have won so many Stanley Cups with him, and why he had they scored 5 goals, and how many points did he have in that game?
Last night, it was all third liner scoring last night, but he hasn't scored 3 in the last 5, and he had 123 points last year. Look, this is a good transition to the Lions because, like in any sport, even in basketball, your favorite sport, Dave, one player is not enough. LeBron's not enough. LeBron set the all-time scoring record against the Oklahoma City Thunder Tuesday night in L.A., and they lost to the Thunder, right? So, and he had 30 whatever, I don't know, to surpass Kareem. So one player can't get it done. Obviously, one player can't get it done in football. But we're bringing in Dave Carlos to talk about maybe a few players the Lions need, among other things, to get to the level of the teams that we're going to watch Sunday in the Super Bowl. So what you say, Carlos?
I say that, people need to send Dave Burkett, at dburkett at freepress.com some mailbag questions about which quarterback the Lions need to draft, because that's the one player that they're missing, right, Dave?
I'm going to have to take the Kyrie approach. I might have to ask for a trade if you don't start referring to me as a great Dave Burkett again. I feel disrespected right now. So,
are you going to go into a 4-day retreat of darkness?
I'm thinking about that. Yeah, I really am. No, it's, look, it's, I don't need any more mailbag questions about Jared Goff and the quarterback situation. Will the Lions draft one? That is half of every single mailbag I've done this year. People ask those questions, and I get it. I'm certainly on the, let's talk about a quarterback, all the time train. But I can't wait for free agency to get here, maybe a little closer to draft season, so we can dive closer into some of those prospects that the Lions will be looking at.
Well, Dave, I want you. Hopefully, I'm not talking out of school here, but the last time we saw each other was, and I think all three of us saw each other, was at a going away party for several of our colleagues, including our former editor, Peter Bhatia, who we need to mention now because we're no longer going to mention him at the end of this podcast. That would be the great Anjanette Delgado. I think that's where we're going to shift the great to, the modifier, if that's okay, Dave. But anyway, you were telling me when we ran into each other at that gathering, and again, I don't want to go out of turn here. Get out, what's the word here I'm looking for, Dave? I don't want to give away any of your secrets, but let's just say you were talking about Goff and kind of looking at some of the numbers, and as good as he's been and sort of the mainstream numbers, there's this idea that the play make ability, the play make numbers, are you going to make a play when everything is kind of chaotic and collapsing, that those aren't quite still there. And is that the difference? Obviously, I mean, we're not going to compare him to Mahomes necessarily, but is that the difference between where he's at and the level above him, the quarterbacks?
We always do get into the quarterback discussion here in the podcast too. Yeah, no, I mean, Sean, look, Sean is right. What we were talking about at that point was PFF had sort of put out its rankings, or was maybe evaluating some of the quarterback play, and that's exactly what they said about Goff was. His numbers, I don't think anyone can deny, he took a step forward as a player this past year. His numbers were significantly better. He scaled back on the interceptions, threw more touchdowns, threw more yards. He finished the season with 324 straight, attempts without an interception. And the Lions won a lot more games. But yes, that's where he lacked. That there were still, he still had more turnover-worthy plays than maybe what showed up in the statistics, and he didn't make enough difference-making passes down the field, some of those big plays. And so I do think that's sort of where, and look, people see that, or they realize, right, that the top of the NFL is Mahomes and Burrow and Josh Allen, and maybe Jalen Hurts is getting in that conversation, right? Justin Herbert, there's a few others. And so I guess that's sort of the debate, right? If you don't have that guy, like, do you need to get that guy? How badly do you need to try for that guy? Do you pay Goff $40 million a year, or whatever it's going to cost to extend him, $45 million? If he's not in that category, or is it better to, especially when you have a top 6 pick, to roll the dice on a young quarterback where, you have the benefits of having that guy on a rookie contract, even if you, maybe take a step back at quarterback play for a season. So I think that's and when the Lions have a top 6 pick, it's easy to, sort of wonder, like, hey, man, maybe we could get a Will Levis and let him sit for a year, and he's got all this talent, and see how he develops, and we'd be okay because we'd still have all this money we can spend, on these other positions and build up our defense. And so that's the debate that a lot of fans are having, or that I see on email and the questions that I get from people.
Well, the question is really like, I think you gotta say that Brad Holmes has built up enough equity and trust in the fan base, right? And that he's made some pretty good picks. Especially in the first round, yes, he's had high draft picks, but they've worked out. So the question is, what do they have? The 6th pick, and they got the 18th pick in the first round. If he picks a quarterback with either of those picks, in a way, I'd love to see it from a test tube case of what's going to happen here. Who is it? How is it going to work out? But no matter who it is, if he does take a quarterback, so far it's worked out. If this is where we get to see and judge his ability to identify a potentially great player and the heir to Goff. And like you said, whether it's Levis or whoever, if they sit for a year, I think everybody's happy with that scenario of this is a chance. But if it's not CJ Stroud, right, nobody's going to be happy. Right now, he's the guy that everybody thinks is going to be the first quarterback taken, right? So if it's not him, and I know you're shaking your head, you're not happy with that, but
I don't think people here would be happy with it. I don't think people here would be happy with CJ Stroud because of the whole Ohio State connection, just knowing how poorly a lot of Ohio State quarterbacks have played.
Joe Burrow, yeah, he's been terrible.
I do think LSU. I do think most people, I think Bryce Young will end up being the first quarterback taken, and I do think he'll end up being the best quarterback in this draft because he's safe. He, checks a lot. Look, he's not the biggest. I understand, some of the knocks on him. He doesn't have maybe the athleticism of a Levis or Stroud even, but I think he's a really good player, and I think he would be, probably the number one quarterback. Levis is the one he's going to have there's going to be a lot of different, feelings on him just because, he was injured this year, and, he's maybe a little more erratic than some of the, he's a little more development ahead, I guess, than Young and Stroud, right? He's a little more of an unknown, not as much as an Anthony Richardson, but, certainly if you're, spending that high of a pick, you maybe want a little more of a polished product, right? So he could benefit from sitting out that year. So I don't know that any of those quarterbacks makes anyone completely happy. And especially, I know there's a lot of Lions fans out there that say no quarterback, right? A lot of people right now are really down with Jared Goff, happy with Jared Goff, that is, right down.
Ride or die.
Quarterback. Yeah. And so they want the Lions to spend 6 and 18 on defense, and build up that defense with these young players. And I think that's, probably the most likely route, right? Like I don't expect to mock a quarterback to the Lions at 6 this year. But there's also it's also more complicated than that, because again, you're going to have to pay Jared Goff $40 or $45 million here within the next, let's just call it 15 months. If you want to keep him, or if you think he's the guy. And, you're eventually Amon-Ra St. Brown's coming due for a contract, and, maybe Jonah Jackson and Penei Sewell. And, you got all these guys that you're going to have to take care of. So that's where, again, that whole rookie quarterback money comes into play.
There are a couple of not necessarily competing ideas, but there's some important context here. And we've talked about one of them. And that is, first of all, you're right about Jalen Hurts. I mean, maybe he takes the final step into the elite quarterbacks, but the Philadelphia's rosters is as complete as any in the leagues.
Loaded.
The question is, if Brock Purdy doesn't get hurt, are they in the Super Bowl? I don't know if they are or not, but let's just say, for argument's sake, they are. They also have a very complete roster and the best defense in the league.
Yep.
And would have had a very, very good chance, obviously, of beating Kansas City. And if that were to have happened, and I think we could say that was a real possibility if he's not hurt, then you're looking at that thinking, okay, you can still win a Super Bowl by building the roster around and having a good quarterback and not an elite quarterback, right? And it reminds me of the documentary. I don't know if you guys have seen this, about the Baltimore Ravens, the 30 for 30.
Yep, I saw most.
And Trent Dilfer's in there, who famously took over for Tony Banks and kind of, I guess, brought leadership, whatever. And so, there's a panel in the documentary where a lot of the players, Ray Lewis and so on and so forth, are kind of reminiscing. And Dilfer's talking about what he tried to bring. He obviously didn't bring a lot of playmaking. Well, that defense was great, but it was in a different era. And I mean, as good as San Francisco's defense is, I was thinking about this when I saw the documentary, they're not shutting teams down like the Ravens were, because the offenses are just too good.
Yeah.
And then Dilfer's talking about, he's not impressed by Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers in a way, and the numbers they're putting up because of the way defenses are this year. So, it's almost kind of competing. I want to get both your thoughts on that and what that may mean for the Lions. But we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. So, as I was kind of leading up there, just the idea, and can you win in this day and age with not necessarily Trent Dilfer, because I think Brock Purdy is obviously a better playmaking quarterback than Dilfer ever was, but I want to get your thoughts on, what Dilfer had to say, and just the idea of the model of the 49ers.
Well, I think it's, look, as I look at the NFL right now, I think the AFC and the NFC teams are constructed different ways, and maybe it's just, where they're at in their building process. Maybe it's how you have to win in those conferences right now, right? The AFC, you have Mahomes and Joe Burrow, who's going to get paid this offseason probably, and Josh Allen. We've talked about that before, right? You have all these great quarterbacks in the AFC. And so I think you do sort of need to be a quarterback dominant team to run that gauntlet and survive in the AFC, right? Like, I don't know that you beat Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes in back-to-back weeks unless you have a Josh Allen or maybe a Justin Herbert or somebody of that ilk, right? In the NFC, there aren't those elite future Hall of Fame type quarterbacks. So you can win with a more complete roster, right? And that's what the Eagles have, and that's what the 49ers have, really. I mean, they have a really good defense. They've got McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, they've got a pretty good offensive line themselves. Trent Williams, right? Maybe the best tackle playing. So I think both those teams have done it that team building way. But in Philly's case, obviously with the second round pick and Jalen Hurts, they sort of have fell into that, having that rookie quarterback model too. But the 49ers, of course, tried to trade up for Trey Lance and find their elite quarterback a couple of years ago, because they know that is the most sustainable way to winning, because eventually you're going to have to pay all these really good players, and that's just a tough thing to do. And I forget what NFL GM said at this offseason, but there was a question they were asked about, somebody on their roster that was making a lot of money this offseason and the potential of a cap casualty. And he said, you know what, I'd rather have really good players on my roster that cost a lot of money than a whole lot of cap space. And so I do think that's how you have to approach it, right? You can't always worry about the future and worry about paying these guys who when injuries or other factors may come into the mix on whether they actually get those contracts or not. But you have to, be realistic about it too, that Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's an extreme bargain right now as one of the best receivers in the NFL and a 4th round pick. Well, give him another year and all of a sudden he's going to be making $25 million a year. Like that's the type of contract that he's in line for next offseason. And so that eats into that cap as the cap will be rising. And if you're going to pay a Jonah Jackson a 3rd round pick to keep this offensive line together, you're going to have to pay him, top of the market guard type money to do it. And so I think there are a lot of things that as the Lions look at the state of this roster and the future of this roster and what they need to do to keep it together, you're going to have to continue drafting strong. You're going to have to continue making smart trades where you add to your draft capital. So you can swing and miss on some guys too, especially if you don't have a quarterback that's making less than what market wage would be on a rookie contract, or even in Jared Goff's case right now. Goff's cap number this year was $30 million. It's going to be the same in 2023. It's in line right now, but it's not the same type of money that Patrick Mahomes and some of these other elite quarterbacks are making. So you do have a little more leeway, a little more wiggle room to mess around with the rest of your roster.
What was the question? I kind of got the dissertation kind of throw. So Dave's basically, you can have a rookie quarterback and elite quarterback. You can go less need and fudge them picks, and I'd rather have great players and not great and more than cap space. There's no secret. There's no perfect way to construct a team, right? I mean, every team is different. I think Dave would marry Patrick Mahomes. I think he's engaged though, but so his lens is a little bit different on how great quarterbacks,
Are you dismissing Patrick Mahomes, Carlson? By the way, the question is,
I hope so much that Jalen Hurts, that the Eagles win. Even if the Eagles win and Mahomes throws 5 picks, it's going to be like, well, the Eagles have just had a great defense from Dave Burkett and Patrick Mahomes. We still know. Remember that interception or that incompletion when he was falling? The greatest incompletion of all time in NFL history. I mean, there's something to be said for the quarterback play. And Sean, we talked about this before. It would have been great if Brock Purdy had taken the 49ers and they won the Super Bowl, because then it would destabilize the Dave Burkettisms of the Dave Burketts of the world, and that you don't have to have an elite quarterback. But that's the
question, right? That's the question, by the way. Can you still win that way, like the way Dilfer won with the Ravens? Because the league's so different.
Well, you can win that way, but I don't know how long you can sustain it. Just like the Ravens only won 1 Super Bowl with that group, right? And I know, again, Jamal Lewis got hurt next year, whatever. But you can't sustain it like you can with an elite quarterback. Well, that's the bottom line of it.
After the Bills lost to the Bengals, the Bills GM, Brandon Beane, complained about it, or kind of, sort of explained, like, well, the Bengals have 2 of their star players on rookie contracts, Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. We had to pay Josh Allen and we had to pay Stephon Diggs, and that eats up cap space and capital, right, to pay other players. He's absolutely right. But we have to remember something about the Lions. We're not talking about Super Bowls with the Lions here. Let's just have them get to the playoffs. Let's just make sure right now, use that cap space, get as many good players as you can. I think and I don't know if you said something about the future or whatever, quoting George Allen, still in his futures now, whatever it was, but that's right now, the Lions need to capitalize. And I've written this about the window is short right now. You still have Ben Johnson. Do as much as you can this season coming up, pay some guys, win right now. And then when Jared Goff gets to a contract year, either this next year or the year after, whatever, let him go in free agency, draft a quarterback. Then you start thinking about the future. But you got to walk before you can run. So I wouldn't worry too much about dynasty building for the Lions right now. I just worry about what's going to get you to the playoffs and maybe have you win a game or two.
You're right. Getting to the playoffs served Jim Caldwell well. That was good. He got to the playoffs that first year. By year 4, no one wanted to hear it anymore. No one cared about it. You have to have the eye on the big picture. You got to try to win this thing, the whole thing, not in 1 year, but you have to have the eye on building something sustainable.
That was different. That was a completely different era and time and circumstance with Stafford and Calvin. And did he still have Sue?
8 years ago was a different era?
Yeah. For the Lions, I mean, the context for where they were in their team building, mode. Right now, they're at the beginning of that.
Yeah, if the Lions would have had foresight at the time and not extended Ndamukong Suh or not done all those contract restructures so then they could franchise him, then they would have had control over him. Just like they had control over Matthew Stafford.
He wasn't going to be franchised. He was already difficult to deal with. He has no
control over whether he's franchised or not. That's the team franchise.
One second. I have a question. And my question is, and by the way, I didn't mean to interrupt because I love it. I didn't want to stop a delicious, tasty fight that was about to start between you two. But my question is, so we're talking about the Ravens. Let's keep talking about the Ravens, but not the Tony Siragusa Ravens, but the Ravens of Mr. Harbaugh, who coached against the other Mr. Harbaugh in the Super Bowl. That wasn't that long ago either. And Joe Flacco, if I'm not remember, won that Super Bowl. So was that a different era, Dave and Carlos? Or is 8 years, whatever it is, 9 years, is enough changed even since then?
Look, you can win building that complete team model.
Because they've done it twice, right? They've done it twice. Yeah.
But it's not like why Carlos made that point, right? Like, Brandon Beane and the Bills were kind of like taking a shot while the Bengals can do this because they have these young guys. And, Burrow's on a rookie contract and they haven't had to pay Jamar Chase yet. And look what we had to do. 100% true. When you have when you have that young quarterback, there's so much value in that. But you know why Kansas City has been in 5, straight AFC championship games and in a couple Super Bowls now? Because of Patrick Mahomes. Carlos may not like me championing Patrick Mahomes all the time, but he's going to win his second MVP award. He's the best quarterback in football right now. When you have that, you're always a contender. And the Cincinnati Bengals, no matter how much they have to pay Burrow and what that does to the rest of their roster, they will be a contender with Joe Burrow at quarterback. And the Buffalo Bills will be a contender with Josh Allen as long as he stays healthy because those guys are elite. And if you don't have that elite quarterback, it's a lot more land that you have to farm to be successful rather than having this one big prize cow that you can go sell at the state fair and, pay for your
the state fair. That's really nice. I want to defend Carlos here for the second. It's not just Mahomes. Kansas City also has a really good general manager, is it Veach? Brett
Veach, and they got a great defensive lineman in Chris Jones. So it's not just
pronounced Andy Reid, by the way. But yeah, go ahead.
No. But Reid gets all the pub, right? Just like Reid gets all the pub, Mahomes gets all the pub. But that GM has completely remade that roster from the first. Just about they've got 6 or 7 guys from that first NFC title game. I wrote about this last week. Actually, that's the key to me. The key above all else is the general manager. I don't care how good Mahomes is. Aaron Rodgers is as good a quarterback as there's ever been, and he's been to 1 Super Bowl. I'm not saying that Green Bay's had a bad general manager or whatever. They've had plenty of good competitive teams, mostly probably because of Rodgers. But if you don't have an ability to spot talent, which is what Kansas City's done, they had 4 rookies, I think, making plays this year. One of them made a game-sealing interception against Jacksonville when Trevor Lawrence, another one of your young Hall of Fame future types, right, was making a comeback in the divisional round. So to me, that's what we're really talking about. As much as Carlos wants to talk about Mr. Johnson and how he's the most important cog, and we can all say Dan Campbell's super important, he is, it's really about Brad Holmes, right? Because none of this is possible if you don't have a general manager that can figure this out and find talent in ways and later rounds, et cetera, because nobody sustains it unless you can do that.
It's all about Brad Holmes because you just wrote a column about the general manager's important. It's all about Brad Holmes.
If Veach doesn't get the guys he did a year ago, Kansas City's not in the title game or the Super Bowl right now. I mean, that's the most important thing. And we don't talk about that enough, I don't think.
I don't know. I mean, well, the Chiefs traded up to get Patrick Mahomes. That was Andy Reid. Offensive genius, knowing this is the guy I need. And he was smart enough. And a lot of other, not a lot, but I think other teams wanted to trade up to get him too. They were interested, but Andy Reid pulled the trigger on that. He knew what he was looking at. And if you look at you look at the Chiefs, the problem with the Chiefs, and this is why I really hope that they lose this year, is because they've never had a top 10 defense, right? In like overall in yards under Patrick Mahomes. So as great as he is, yes, he's done enough. If you want to talk about dynasties and Super Bowls and all this stuff, he has in several ways carried that team. He is the by far most important cog. He's a great player. When Dave Burkett gives the Hall of Fame induction speech, and when he's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame or Pro Football Writers meeting, he's going to somehow strangely be the guy advocating for Holmes 5 years after he retires. But even though he didn't work in Kansas City, but that's the thing is you still need some. It's still a complementary game. You don't need a top 2, 3, 4, 5 defense probably, but you need something close to a top 10, a top third. Quality defense to help you, because the quarterback just can't do it alone. The offense just can't do it alone. It's so rare to have to rely on one side of the ball, let alone one player. So that's where I don't know about your amazing GM with the Chiefs, but if it's going to be if the Chiefs don't win the Super Bowl, the narrative is going to quickly switch to: Are the Chiefs wasting Patrick Mahomes' prime? Like he's going to have been in 3 Super Bowls, but just have won once. He's too good they'll be saying he's too good of a player, and especially losing to, the Eagles will have won 2 Super Bowls in whatever it is, 4 or 5 years with 2 different head coaches, 2 different quarterbacks. Howie Roseman, that's a better example, probably the general manager in Philadelphia.
No, he's a great example too. I wrote about him too. Thank you. Yeah, no, he was the other guy I mentioned, but thank you.
You can go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and steal my comment and put it in your column.
No, I already did last week. I spent just as much time on him. So no, because what he's done in roster, but he didn't at the point, Dave. I mean, you're right. You got to have an elite quarterback to make a long, deep run, and obviously a coach helps a lot. Although in Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers showed that the coach is maybe a little bit less important than obviously the franchise quarterback. But to me, if you don't have somebody filling out that roster, right? You mentioned Chris Jones. He's probably the biggest reason they're in the title game. He's the reason Cincinnati couldn't score. Right? Joe Burrow got the ball back with 2 minutes, at least 1 timeout, maybe 2 timeouts in a tie game, and Chris Jones made sure they didn't do anything.
Look, I think we've said this before. There's 100 different ways to win in the NFL, so you don't have to follow one blueprint, right? It could be based on having that elite quarterback. It could be based on having the young quarterback and the elite roster. It could be having a great defense like the Ravens did back in the day. There are many ways to win, and if you have a really good GM and a really good coach and a really good quarterback, those things all seem to go together. And the more you have the more boxes you check when it comes to having really good people at whatever the position, the more likely you are to win. And I think that's the case with both these teams, both the Chiefs and the Eagles. And look, every single year, I'm guilty of this too. Every single year we look at the Super Bowl teams and you say, what can this mean for the Lions, right? The Bengals last year went from, one of the worst teams in the NFL to one of the best, and they went to the Super Bowl. And oh man, can the Lions, use this as their blueprint for success? And now it's the Eagles, and look what they did with all their extra draft picks and, sort of building up the roster when they didn't have an elite quarterback, and then building, around one who may be turning into one. So I think we do this with every team, every Super Bowl. But the reality is you can win 100 different ways in the NFL. You just have to have good people at a whole bunch of different spots, whichever way you choose. And if you do that, you can have some success.
Well, this is a trigger warning for all the listeners, but Matthew Stafford, right? Like, is he elite? There was a question about him. That's going to be the question that's going to be on his tombstone. It's going to say Matthew Stafford is birth and death dates, and then was I elite? That's what we're going to have to. That's his legacy. Well, he was borderline elite, and when they won the Super Bowl, he had a very, very good season. He got some luck. Jaquiski Tartt drops the easiest pick you'll ever get, and the 49ers in their Super Bowl right last year. So, but they built that team. Les Snead, used a lot of picks, spent a lot of picks to get the team that he needed to because of their window. And Stafford was good enough. I mean, I would still say that Stafford is a better quarterback than Jared Goff, but they're in the same neighborhood, more or less. And Snead, he built up the defense, and you had, like you said, there's not just one way. I don't think you have to have Patrick Mahomes. You don't have to have Joe Burrow. You don't have to have Josh Allen. You can have a pretty good quarterback, a borderline elite guy like a Goff, like a Stafford, to probably, if you have enough help, to do something in the playoffs, to possibly get to the Super Bowl, possibly win it. And by the way, Stafford, I think he should have been the Super Bowl MVP. It was Cooper Kupp, but he played really well in that game and played well enough, really, really great during the season at points, to get them there. And I think that's okay. You don't, having to get this, that's where I like the Eagles, is because I would like to dispel this notion that you have to have this generational quarterback. Like, if you don't get the guy who's going to be your quarterback for the next 10, 12 years, forget it. The Eagles won with Nick Foles. He was a backup. They still got it done. And they're going to get it. Jalen Hurts is in a different category.
The Eagles got it done with him because they played against Matt Patricia's. No, I just want to throw that.
No, Nick Foles, but that Philly roster was really good too. And by the way, so to your point earlier, Carlos, about you got to walk before you can run. And let me just sidestep here for 2 seconds. The Giants won 2 Super Bowls. Again, the first one, not the 90s Super Bowl, not the 90s Super Bowl. I'm talking about the more recent Giants Super Bowl wins.
Yeah.
The first one was kind of a different era. It was 2007 or whatever it was when they beat the undefeated Patriots. That was defensive line oriented. And the second time they did it was more or less defensive line oriented, right? They put pressure on Brady, just like Chris Jones put pressure on Burrow, et cetera, et cetera. That part has not changed in football for 50 years. So that part's the same. But this idea of a generational talent, I understand what you're saying, Dave.
And
but
Eli's in that boat too. Not the greatest quarterback ever.
But it had an ability to make a couple throws at the end of the game. To your point about Stafford, who made an incredible throw against Tampa Bay and Brady last year in the divisional round to Kupp to set up the winning field goal. Can Goff do that? I don't know. But your points about the generational talent, I get it, Dave. If you want to be the Patriots or the Packers, although they won enough Super Bowls, or the Chiefs right now, I guess that's a better example. Fine, that's 2 teams in 30 years. If you're shooting for that, for the Lions fans that won 1 game in almost 60 years, 1 playoff game, they just would love 1 Super Bowl run, right? So however you can get it done, and Goff is absolutely good enough to make a Super Bowl run, mostly because he's already done it. So what's the goal, Dave? Is the goal 5 straight NFC title games, or is it a Super Bowl run that will lift up this area and people will remember the rest of their lives, right?
Obviously, you want to make a Super Bowl and no one is turning that down. But the point is, like, no one's going to be happy with just one. If you win one, you're thrilled in that moment. But it's like, Nick Saban, right? When he wins the championship, right? He starts, what does he say? Like he's back to work the next day, right? Like that's what is driving all of these people. And well, Howie Roseman got fired and then he came back basically and rebuilt the Eagles again. So it's never like that little taste of success is never enough. Like, you want that Tom Brady 2 decades of sustainable winning in New England. And you want what the Kansas City Chiefs have right now. And shoot, you can make fun of, the Packers for winning 1 Super Bowl under Aaron Rodgers. Okay, that's your one. But guess what? For 3 decades, they've been the best team in the NFC North or Central, whatever it was before. And really one of the best teams in the NFC because they had Brett Favre and then they had Aaron Rodgers. So if you want to be that elite team that, everyone else looks up to and is chasing all the time and trying to catch and trying to become, really, then you absolutely need that elite quarterback to be that. And again, you can win Super Bowls without it. You can win multiple Super Bowls without it. But if you're trying to build a sustainable long-term winner, ultimately, you're still going to be searching for that quarterback if you don't have one.
The Rodgers thing is an interesting citation because that's the reason that they've only won 1 is they never had a great defense, during Aaron Rodgers' time, so that's what's held them back. If they'd had better defense, he probably would have won more. Almost certainly would have won more Super Bowls, but I do think that that's a good place for the Lions to sort of hope is, even winning a Super Bowl would be amazing, but just to be in that category of always challenging for the division title, either winning it or being close to it, but not these, I mean, the constant, they get close, they finish second, and then it's like 2-3 years in the basement, and then they get to second again, and then the division, and then another year in the basement, and they crawl up to third because the Bears suck, and this and that. It's just this yo-yo thing that they just can never. They're always either just treading water or maybe getting a little bit of some momentum, and then they, sink back down and bob back up, and it's just exhausting to see them go through this. So just some sustained success. Challenging for the division title, being in the playoffs somewhat regularly, and I think, hey man, you look at this team and hopefully you learn from the past, and Sheila, Ford Hamp learns from the past, and the whole 9-7 isn't good enough. That was just smokescreen. Bob Quinn just wanted to hire his buddy, Matt Patricia. He was going to use any excuse he could. I think that was just overblown.
That was his smokescreen, but it's 100% right. 9-7 is not good enough.
It's not good enough if you're constantly challenging and you've met the standard and you're always winning and like you're going to 9-7. But that's as good as they could do at the time. No. Do you want them to be better? Of course, but they had no right to expect to be winning 12, 13, 14 games.
No, not with their history. And look, let's wrap this section up with this. So you're both right. Sustained success is obviously the ultimate model, or excuse me, the ultimate goal. But in this market, to me, it would be akin to when the Red Sox finally won the World Series, and you had half of Boston walking around saying, "I'm ready to die now." I just think that I just think that that's what would happen here. And yes, eventually, maybe the next year, they'd be bummed if they didn't get back. But the glow of that will last a little bit longer. It's a little bit unique. I understand long-term success, absolutely. But it's still a little bit different here. It's a unique market in a lot of ways. And if they go on a Super Bowl run, the earth will implode, first of all. But it'll just be different. But look, Dave, let's talk, and Carlos, about what you actually think the Lions are going to do instead of what we want them to do or what fans want them to do. Starting this draft and the rebuilding process from now till next September to try to take these next steps. But let's take another quick break, one last quick break, and pay some more bills. And we'll be right back with more Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. Welcome back to Free Press Sports with Carlos and Sean. Carlos, do you like the acoustics today? Does it sound like I'm in a recording studio?
It does. It sounds like a very professional setup. As we know, you spend a lot of time to get here early to the podcast and make sure all the audio and video is right. So I appreciate it, Sean.
Yeah, no, it's great. I even turned off the fan, which was going to keep me either warm or cool in this little studio that I have, so we wouldn't hear the fan. You know what I mean? So I'm suffering here a little bit for you, Carlos. I want you to know that. And for Robin and for Andrew.
And for Anjanette.
Who's Anjanette?
Who's Anjanette?
Oh, Anjanette. Dave met Anjanette recently for the first time.
True story.
It is a true story. She's like, "Oh, I know who you are." Yeah. The man who writes a million stories a month.
It's funny how Dave would know every once in a while every 7 or 8 years when Dave decides to grace us with his presence at a staff meeting, he'll run into somebody I have like, how does he know this person? And it traces back to I think it was like the state news at Michigan State or something, but it's like, how do you know this person? So it's always kind of fun to see the connections. The 6 degrees of briquette separation is fun.
Yeah,
it is. All right. So
hey, before you go, I know we're jumping into sort of a different topic here, but I just need to make one point, Sean, because right before the break, you were talking about, the Red Sox and people dying, and they're all being happy enough that they won a Super Bowl, a World Series, that all those fans could die now. And I think you're 100% right. That's exactly what Lions fans would be like in that moment, because the Red Sox are on their 5th different manager since Terry Francona won that World Series. And that's exactly what would happen with Detroit and with anywhere. You get used to that success, and it's never enough unless you can sustain it. So it would be like that in the moment. And then the next year they'd be like, why can't we do this again? What's going wrong? Maybe we need to make this change. Do we need a new quarterback? Do we need a new coach? Our GM isn't doing his job anymore, even though he's picking 32nd instead of picking 3rd. So all those things.
No, there's no question. That's all true. But like a lot of older folks in that area and in Boston, they still carry that. I mean, when you have that kind of a drought, and their drought is 30, 40 years longer than the Lions drought, So it's just the psychology of that. I mean, it would be really fun if the three of us could, not just the three of us, but everybody. But it would be enjoyable to be able to cover something like that and just see the reaction, right? I mean, not from the team. I mean, the team would go crazy, but just the region. That would be.
Yeah. It better be more than three of us because that'd be a lot of work to do. So
yeah, no, for sure. Can you imagine?
I've already told our sports editor and executive producer of this podcast, Kirk Crawford, that Dave will be embedded with Ron Cracchiola, Crackman. If you know, like as soon as he's not going to go to the game, he's just going to sit with Crack will be at the game, I'm sure, but right next to him in the stadium. So
we would send our whole staff, wouldn't we? Basically,
I was thinking about that. Listening to some of the Super Bowl media night interviews the other day, like there's let's call it 10 players on risers or 15 on risers spread throughout the thing, and every other player for both teams is there's 10 per team. Let's call it. Every other player is spread throughout the media night extravaganza, and you could spend an hour at each player that's on the riser. And, just to write a really good story off what they're doing. And then you still have, 40 other players that are out and about in the general population. So you basically need to put one reporter at every podium and then have, a few others floating around. And that doesn't even count the coaches and, all the assistants. And so, there is so much content that could be had if your team is in the Super Bowl. And
what's the over under, Carlos, and how many staff we would send, not including photographers, because we'd send a bunch of those too.
It'd be 4 people. It'd be you, Jeff Seidel, Mitch Albom, and Dave Burkett. And we're talking about how this would kill the fans. Dave would do all the work. I mean, you'd write one, maybe 2 stories that week. I mean, it would.
I'd write twice a day, like I always do at big events like that. You might write once a week. But again, projection is an interesting quality. But we're gonna figure that out with you some other time and get you on the couch. No. I would bet be serious and over under. We'd probably send 10.
We'd send about 10
over.
people.
Yeah. I'd take over. I'd go over.
Would you go over for that? Yeah, you might be right. You might be right. God. The fact is, and this is going to lead us into this last subject here again with the Lions, though.
If we have more than 10, that is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Oh, boy. Way to stick the knife in. The fact that we're having this conversation, I know we're joking around and having fun, but the fact that it's not ridiculous, that feels new, right? I mean, I don't ever remember us even joking around about.
Who says it's not ridiculous? You think it's realistic they're going to go to the Super Bowl next year?
No, not next year. I'm just saying for the first time since I've been around, since the early 90s, really, when they got to the NFC title game, it doesn't feel crazy to think that there's a possibility they could make a run in the next couple of years or 2-3 years, whatever.
When they had Calvin and Stafford and Sue, people thought they could make a run.
No, for sure. Well, yes.
They should have beat the Cowboys that year, and what
they should have, but they weren't good enough that year to compete with anybody. I don't remember having that sense. Do you, Dave, about that team that they were good enough to knock off anybody? By the end of this year, you're like, God, they can play with anybody.
I do think in 2014, just because that defense was so good that there were a lot of people that thought they could. Win. I don't remember ever thinking, they were a Super Bowl contender, but I do think people thought they could win a game in the playoffs or two, right? They were just so good to start that season, couldn't get past Green Bay. But yeah, no, I said this before too. I think 2012, there was a lot of optimism going into 2012 too, because that was coming off the first playoff year in 12 seasons or whatever it was, and Stafford was young, and Calvin Sue was young. He was in his 3rd season. Calvin was in the prime of his career. They had just come off that really big 2011 season. Stafford was like going into year 4, and then they imploded that next year when they just didn't do anything in the offseason and finished 4-12 and lost like 8 straight to end the year. But there was a lot of optimism. People forget that because it was such a bad year. There's a lot of optimism going into 2012 as well.
I real quickly, Carl, I'm curious what you think about this too. I think the one difference, and it's a little bit subtle, but not completely subtle, is that was based on star power to some degree on the field. What people are feeling right now is mostly based on Campbell and Holmes. And obviously Johnson, right? And some of the young talent, but I think that's maybe the difference, and that feels a touch more sustainable. Whether it turns out to be true, who knows? But in any case, I'm curious what you think.
I think that this there's always a recency bias, and you have to give the Lions full credit for what they did. They won 8 of the last 10. Great. And that's always going to make everybody feel good. And as I mentioned, someone on this podcast was kind of low key griping that Campbell was not a finalist for Coach of the Year. Well, when you're asking questions about who can fire who during the season, when they're 1-6, probably shouldn't be Coach of the Year or even in the running for it or consideration. No matter
who's griping about that? Who's griping?
Someone whose name rhymes with Dave Burkett was kind of low key, griping about it when he wrote about it.
He's shaking his head, by the way, listener.
Look, I thought Dan Campbell, he was deserving of Coach of the Year consideration. I don't think he should have won it because, I do think Brian Daboll getting that team to the playoffs and obviously the job, both these Super Bowl teams. I mean, the Eagles, I don't know that people thought they'd be good, but I don't know that anyone thought they would be this good. And the Chiefs, that you forget, a lot of people were down on them. So and I think Andy Reid has done a great job with, the new cast of characters that he's had on offense. But I do think Dan Campbell is deserving of consideration, should at least be in the conversation.
Why? You were asking Brad Holmes if he could fire Dan Campbell during midway through the season. Why does he deserve consideration? Didn't get to the playoffs.
I asked Brad Holmes if he had the power to make a move like that, trying to find out what the power structure was within the Lions organization, because the Lions had never been clear about that. Let's just make sure that the listeners understand that.
So your kid makes a big mess in the house and then he cleans it up at the last second, so he gets Kid of the Year. But he didn't get straight A's or anything like that, but he cleaned up his mess and made it look okay.
I'll tell you part of the reason why, because digging out of 1-6 is a damn tough hole to dig out of. And Dan Campbell deserves a lot of credit, and his staff, for making sure that this team, came out of that. And like Sean said, they were playing as well as just about every team in the NFL at the end of the season. And they didn't make the playoffs, but you know what? They won 9 games. That's a mark that very few people thought they would make this or reach this year. Maybe I picked them to win 9s, but very few people who aren't as smart as me thought they would.
You and I both picked them to win 9, and we got mocked on this very podcast before the season started.
So, but the point being,
rightfully so,
it was a very
okay.
There's been one team that started 1-6 in NFL history that's gone on to make the playoffs, and the Lions won 9 games. They won 8 of their final 10 after doing that. And I think Dan Campbell deserves a lot of credit for what went on, for picking this team up, making sure that they did not, hang their head, and they stayed competitive and they won some games, and then they got on a roll and they probably outperformed their talent on the roster a little bit because they were so young. So I absolutely think that Dan Campbell probably didn't do the best job of any coach in the NFL. I think Brian Daboll will win it, and he probably should, because I don't think the Giants have that talent of a roster either. But I think it's Dan Campbell deserves to be in the conversation for that. Now,
I'm playing a little devil's advocate here because it is true. But the problem is the way the voting works, people don't look at all that nuance, but it is true. This was the Titanic, and he steered it away from the iceberg in a very difficult way by firing Aubrey Pleasant the year before, even that, making changes, giving Ben Johnson the job, and all that stuff, and then coming back from a terrible start. He does get a ton of credit, but realistically, he's never going to be considered. If your team doesn't make the playoffs, you're just fixing a problem and playing well at the end of the season isn't good enough to say, oh, this is the best coach in the NFL. And that's really what the award is. Who is the best coach? And there's a bias because the teams that are really good, the Chiefs and whatever, they're rolling. I mean, and you're just going to get the result of the spoils of that, right? All the success, it's a byproduct of that. Well, of course you must be a great coach because your team's great.
Right.
There's something to that. But this brings up a good point, right? Now there's going to be a ton of expectations on this team because of the way they finished, because right now, and I believe it, I do believe it, what Sean said, that this team could play with anybody at the end of the year. Totally believe that. But we saw it with the Schwartz thing, right? When they won in 2011, right? When Dave said, everybody's feeling good. You got a young Stafford, a young Sue, pretty young Calvin still. And they go 10-6. And this is now, if we'd had a podcast, Sean Windsor would have been saying the winning will be uninterrupted for decades. Nothing will happen. It was the first time they'd won 10 games since 95. it had been like, 15 years or so, 16 years. Everybody thought this is it. Young coach, Jim Schwartz, economics major at Georgetown. He's great. Dave's general manager of the decade, Martin Mayhew, he's in charge. Tom Lewan's a really smart guy. He'd be the first one to tell you all this stuff. Great. We're on the way. And then face plant 4-12. Okay. It can happen. If it happened then, it can happen now.
Of course,
there's nothing special about Dan Campbell that makes them, immune from this. They're lucky to have Ben Johnson back, but it's going to be so interesting to see how they respond to now playing with huge expectations, because Sean is already booking his ticket for the Super Bowl next year. So we got to live up to Sean Windsor's expectations.
No, I have no idea what's going to happen next year. I mean, you're right; they could completely face plant. However, I do think Campbell. Look, that kind of coaching matters, and Dave. I'm not sure what to do with this. Maybe you have some thoughts. Carlos has got some idea. This is Ben Johnson and not Dan Campbell, and it sort of flabbergasts me. It's that shows, and I don't think Carlos is this, but it shows sort of a lack of understanding of a team sport. So can you help me out here, Dave, at all a little bit with that part of it?
I don't. Why does it have to be one? It can be both, right? Like Dan Campbell deserves a lot of credit for where these Lions are right now. A lot. Like he is the leader of the ship. He has empowered his players. He's empowered his coaches, right? He put Ben Johnson in his position. I mean, I think Ben is executing Dan's vision on offense. Dan is the one who, with a lot of these fourth down decisions that, that's really important for the. I think the fortitude of this team to be able to go for some of those and convert some of those and what that means. But
pass to Penei Sewell, he didn't even know was coming because of the wave.
No, he was joking about that. But yet, regardless, like Ben Johnson is a very bright offensive mind, and he's done some really good things on offense. And I do think he'll be a head coach when there's 9 jobs open instead of the 5 there were this year. Like Ben Johnson is going to get one of those jobs if the Lions are anywhere close to as good offensively next season as they were this season. So Ben Johnson deserves a lot of credit for what's happened on offense. I've said myself, I'm certainly interested to see what becomes of Jared Goff when Ben Johnson is not the coordinator. I think there's, that's a legit question to wonder about. But look, Dan Campbell deserves a lot of credit for what's gone on too. I think those guys both share. And Sean, to your point, the column that you wrote last week, like Brad Holmes deserves a ton of credit too, because he's put a lot of these people in place that they're winning with.
Well, and that's going to be the key going forward. And I want Carlos's thoughts here too. It's funny you're talking about. Look, obviously Ben Johnson is super talented, but Carlos just sort of told on himself a little bit with that comment about that Campbell jokingly made when he went on somebody's podcast about not knowing the play was coming and looking at the way, being distracted. This is one of the things that makes him such a good coach. And Carlos and I've actually talked about this before, just the way he handles his pressers, the way he talks to the press, the way he talks about his coaches, right? And the way he elevates them in his language publicly, because I think that matters. Forget how he treats us or any of that thing, but just the way he uses those, that's part of coaching too. And I think that's really important. But of course, Carlos, Ben Johnson is really talented, and Dave's point is a really good one about what's going to happen to Goff. But let me get your thought, Carlos, on what they need to do, because let's bring this back to Brad Holmes for a second. Because if he doesn't keep drafting the way he's drafted the last couple of years, then none of this is going to matter, and 4-12 is going to be out there fairly quickly.
Yeah, he needs to. I mean, he's had a very good first draft and an excellent, great second draft. Can he sustain that? I mean, that's hard to do. It'd be great if he could. If he does that and gets with almost all of his picks, gets contributors, starters, all that stuff. I mean, that's going to be the key. That's going to be the thing that changes this team. But he's done a good enough job, and I think, to me, Dave, you tell me what you think, but I think that general managers, I think they tend to look at positions and how they draft of what do I need to take care of? And yes, they always have to have an eye on the future for developing guys and all that. But what are my pressing needs right now? What is it that I absolutely have to address? And I think the way they look at it is this position is okay. I don't have to address it. especially with the high pick or whatever. And that's when the whole thing, and I don't want to get back to the quarterbacks, but the Goff thing, Jared Goff has eased that worry, like you don't have to go get a quarterback. Coming into this year, there was a big question. They had fired their coordinator. You didn't know what you're going to get out of Ben Johnson. What's going to happen? Goff did not look great. Playing under Anthony Lynn, he looked a little better toward the end of the season with Campbell and Johnson in charge, but nobody knew. So, but now, and because you have Ben Johnson come back, that offense is it's going to be the same offense. It's intact. Probably the guys are only going to get better. JMO is going to be might be a really, great player. We'll see. So there's a lot of optimism for the offense. I think that's the luxury that Brad Holmes might have, is I don't have to worry about that side of the ball a whole lot. I can devote a lot of resources to defense. And the defense, what did they finish on offense? It was fifth in the NFL, and on defense, worst in the NFL after second worst last year. You have to really, free agency and drafts, go at the defense hard. Just do not just hammer away. You've got to shore that side of the team up. That's the thing that's holding this team back. So that's the thing. Whether it's trading all your picks for Jalen Carter, I don't know what it is, but
I'd say two things on that.
Dave, real quickly, I want to hear your thought on this, so you can say three things, please. I kind of want to make this quick point. They were historically bad defensively the first half. What were they the last 8 games, right? They weren't the worst defense in the NFL. So
mediocrely bad. Yeah.
They were more average. Yeah, exactly. They were more mediocre.
16, baby.
So they're building from that as opposed to one of the worst defenses in the history of the league. All right. What your three things, Dave?
No, that ties into that. I mean, look, I think we all know they need a lot of work done defensively, right? Really all three levels. But to say they don't have to do much offensively, I think that's a little short-sighted, because, it doesn't take, look, who knows what's going on at right guard. If they don't resign Jonah Jackson, you're going to need a left guard. Running back position, like DeAndre Swift's entering his last year. Jamal Williams isn't going to score, 16, 17 touchdowns again next year. Who knows exactly what you have at tight end. Maybe you do need a number 2 receiver or number 3 receiver, another outside receiver if you don't bring DJ Chark back. So I do think there are things that, as you look to, again, build a sustainable winner here, that you have to make some long-term decisions. That if the Lions go ahead and draft Bijan Robinson at 18, well, that's going to help them a lot this year, but it's also because they're not going to bring DeAndre Swift back after the 2023 season, and that's one less hole they have to fill after that. So I think there's a lot more nuance to it, obviously, than most people realize. And the other thing I wanted to say is look, 2012, again, it's definitely sort of like this, this red flag, like, hey, Lions were in this spot before where everyone thought things were hunky-dory and headed the right direction, and then they didn't do anything that offseason, and they fell apart. They went 4-12. Well, part of that is because ultimately this league is about the players, and what players you have on your roster and how they develop and how good they are. And you know what happened in 2012? They took Riley Reif. I mean, they picked 23rd, so they didn't have the 6th pick. They took Riley Reif, who was fine, and he started a bunch of games that year. But, he wasn't Penei Sewell. And then they took Ryan Broyles in round 2, who was coming off a torn ACL. And then the guys they had the year before, Titus Young was a 2nd-round pick in 2011. And, he had mental issues. And so he wasn't a part of the team, essentially. He didn't become what they thought he was going to become. And Mikel Lesher had the torn Achilles from the season. So all these young guys that they were counting on weren't available or didn't take the step forward that they needed them to do in 2012. And I think that's the key difference between where, those Lions were then and maybe where these Lions are now, is that these Lions now have, who knows what JMO becomes, and he's coming off an ACL like Ryan Broyles was. And, but there's a lot more pieces that the Lions have now, those young pieces that can develop. And a lot more capital that they have in 5 of the top 81 picks to really bolster their roster. So even if the Lions don't do much in free agency this offseason, I think you can still expect them to take a step forward because of the young talent they have, what should happen to those young guys, and then the young talent that they'll be adding still.
It almost sounds like Dave's already setting up Brad Holmes' excuse when he doesn't do anything at free agency. Oh,
I wrote all that before. I wrote all that before about the 2012 season. So I just sort of was top ahead on what exactly went wrong there. And I think there's a lot that the Lions did wrong those years in terms of some of those draft picks. when they didn't have a lot of cap space and weren't going to spend, and so they didn't, and so there's there's a lot going on, right? I mean, we all remember that the salary cap changed at that time, and they had the Stafford and Sue and Kelvin deals, and so there's a lot that went on to it. But ultimately, it comes down to the players, and especially those young players taking that step forward that you hope or anticipate that they will. We saw that this year with the young guys that the Lions had that Brad Holmes drafted. We didn't see that a decade ago with the players that they had in the team back then.
And Carlos, that was my point earlier on in the podcast. I think that's the difference. First of all, they weren't as good defensively in 11 or whatever as they were better in 14, and then they lost Sue. But I just think that's an interesting. So Carlos, is it fair to say they shouldn't draft Chase Brown, the Illinois running back? Because LeSure is from Illinois, so maybe they want to stay away from that. Is that the point?
Yeah, no more Illinois running backs ever. He's ruined it. He's tainted it. No, obviously. I mean, I've said I think they need to draft a running back. That's important because I don't know. I don't know that Jamal Williams is going to come back. I don't think he will. My guess is he won't. That free agency. Out in the open market, somebody's going to pay him more than the Lions will offer him, and he'll go with that. All the smoke screen, all the stuff he's saying, yeah, you can still love Detroit. You can love the Lions, but, you vote with your checkbook and your family. And, that's what it comes down to. He has no tie to Detroit per se, other than, liking where he's been. But yeah, Bijan Johnson's a great, I think running backs are undervalued. It's just become this popular thing of, they're not it's a passing game now and all that. Well, yeah, look at what, the really good teams. Look at what Christian McCaffrey's doing, Joe Mixon for the Bengals, and, it matters. And they have a big issue there with Jamal Williams if he leaves, and DeAndre Swift has been a disappointment. He just has not done what they hoped he would do. So you've got to, I'm not saying you don't draft anybody on offense. Of course you have to, pay attention to both sides of the ball, but you have to emphasize defense. So I hope that I think Brad Holmes is going to do that. He drafted almost all defenses last draft. So, and the defense, even though it statistically didn't perform, wasn't up there, and they had problems. And some of that was because of Aubrey Pleasant and some problems and whatever. You could see there was hope, the Malcolm Rodriguez and Alex Anzalone played better, the Kirby Joseph, the Chase Lucas. You could see there was a little bit of there's a step. They didn't look as just horrible as they did the year before. So I think that you just need to bolster that side and give your boy Jared Goff as much help as you can get.
He could go like last year, right, guys? It could be defense obviously at 6.
Oh yeah,
maybe the running back you're talking about, David, 18, and they go right back to defense. That's what they did last year, right? Defense, Williams, and then defense. Who knows? Anyway, this has been fun as always. Can we do a few quick my favorite things before we get out of here? We got to get Dave. My system here is about out of power, and Carlos is losing his patience, as he said earlier. He's ready to go. Plus, we are poor producers, right? So. We'll be quick with the favorite thing. You want to start, Carlos?
Yeah, my favorite thing is pretty simple. I was out of town on vacation for a little bit. Got to spend some time with my family in North Carolina, and my youngest niece, her name is Kika, or her name is Francisca, but she's named after her maternal great grandmother, who she never knew, but. She just is in her senior year in high school and getting accepted to all these schools, and she's worked really hard, and it's great. But when I was spending some time with them, and I don't get to see them very often anymore, as much as I'd like, she's become a pretty good guitarist, and she played. I don't like to push people to perform, but she willingly played a song, the Lumineers song, Cleopatra. And I was just really kind of blown away by how good she was at it. And I've never really heard, my sister talk about it or brag about it, whatever. But it was just one of those quiet moments. I think when you have kids and when you see kids, young people, and I always think of her as a little kid because I've seen her, when she was a baby. And when you see someone start to reach this level of expertise, and excellence. It's always really cool to see that, to start taking these steps into, adulthood and coming into their own and feeling confident and proud of what they're doing. It was a really special moment, and it was a great way to end the trip. So that was my.
Well, that's fabulous, my man. What's your favorite thing, Dave?
Good for Chico. Shoot, my favorite thing, except for the last time we did this, it's always about my kids or my basketball team or whatever. So I don't know, since you put me on the spot, I'm going to go with my basketball team this time. We played a game at Little Caesars Arena the other day, just kind of a fun thing
on the ice
every year. On the ice, a basketball game. Come on, man.
You guys beat the Pistons, didn't you?
Yeah, it was close. Dunked on Cade. But no, it was awesome. It was great for them to get out there, and just happy that we've got 11 girls that played in that game, and all 11 scored. They got a chance to get out on the court and get a bucket up. And so I remember when I was a little kid, I told them this before the game. I remember when I was a little kid, I think I was probably playing YMCA ball or something, and we got to go shoot around, like just layups, before a Pistons game at the old Silverdome way back when they were playing there. And so, part of this year for them, this is their 8th grade year for most of them, has been about, creating memories. And, I'm glad, or I hope at least that's a memory that all of them will get to remember at some point.
Spoken like a true coach, creating memories, that's what you hear from coaches more about just about anything is great memories. That's awesome. My favorite thing is that Carlos admitted he didn't know how to make guacamole, which proves that he grew up in Iowa, actually, instead of Los Angeles. No, that's
Eastern Los Angeles. Yes.
Yeah, that's not my favorite thing. Although I was not humbled. That's the wrong word. I was. It was really cool that he says he's on a quest to make better guacamole, and wrote that in the column. I thought that was fun. Real quickly before we get out of here, my favorite thing is the fact that I had to do something to take me out of the house to recording this podcast. And I know we take this for granted, and we talk about the ills of technology a lot, and social media and phone and Wi-Fi and so on and so forth. But there's also some really great parts to it. And I can sit in a parking lot in my car and hang out with you guys and record with just this laptop and a phone, get the signal through that on a battery that's about to run out, by the way. But the fact that you can do that, and we can still do this and move our jobs, the mobility, the flexibility we have in our lives, a lot of times it does cause issues and maybe some heartache and pain and so on and so forth. But it also has a lot of fun bits like this and interesting bits that let you do all sorts of things you never thought you could do. Certainly we didn't when we were young. So it's pretty cool that I get to sit here and in these circumstances and do something like that with y'all. So that's my favorite thing. All right, Carlos, we got to wrap this up. We got to let Dave go. You got to go. You're out of your last bit of patience there, and I'm about out of juice. So who do we need to thank?
Let's thank producers, Free Press producers and editors, Robin Chan and Andrew Hammond for doing all the hard work and the heavy lifting. And we have to thank executive producer, sports editor Kirkland Crawford, and executive producer and interim Free Press editor Anjanette Delgado.
Well, yeah. And then we also want to thank Dave Burkett for coming in and bringing some knowledge to this podcast where there's not much normally just a lot of, blathering. So thanks, buddy, for coming and join us. You're welcome back anytime. We love having you. We want to thank the listeners, also Carlos Wright for sticking with us and putting up with us. And what else do we want to do? We want to tell folks that they can find us wherever you find your favorite podcast, Spotify, Apple. And the most important thing is when you get there, make sure you subscribe, obviously rate us. Tell us you don't love us. That's fine. Tell us you hate us. That's fine. But subscribe and then bang on us. That's fine. Trash us. But make sure you subscribe first before you do that. Because you know how that works, Carlos. Anything else? Or are we good to go?
I don't know. I think we have to. Dave might have to join us next year after Patrick Mahomes loses, and I don't know. He'll probably be too. He'll be in the 4-day darkness retreat of Patrick Mahomes and his Chiefs lose. But this might be the last time we see him in a long time.
2 MVPs.
Well, we will definitely get him back as we did up to the draft in one of his 20 mock drafts, or more, probably more. I'm sure looking for a personal record. Until then, my man, Carlos, you and I'll be back next week with more Free Press Sports with Carlos Sean. Thanks for listening.
There's something that you're not saying.